My next guest is Dr. Beverly Yates. She specializes in helping women reverse type 2 diabetes. Yes, reverse. What are the things you need to focus on, pay attention to? What is in your control when it comes to diabetes type 2? Because there is such a strong link between diabetes and osteoporosis. When we manage one, we help the other. So tune in and listen to what Dr. Yates and I have to discuss on the Stronger Bones Lifestyle podcast.
How are you, Debbie? Thank you so much for this invitation. I'm excited for our conversation. Let's dig in.
Yeah, I'm excited because you and I met at an event and we had this deep talk about diabetes. And I'm like, Beverly, I've got to get you on because just like osteoporosis being 50% of the women over age 50 have it, diabetes is a very big disease that we need to discuss.
Absolutely.
So why don't you tell us about diabetes and the difference between type 1 and type 2, and then we'll go into it from there.
Okay. So diabetes in general is defined as having dysregulation, i.e. not good blood sugar level control. And in that, there's different kinds of diabetes. So let's start with type 1. Originally, type 1 was by far the most common diabetes, right? And type 1 typically, back in the day, was childhood onset. It was known as juvenile diabetes. It no longer is called that. And I'll talk about why in a moment. And in that, what it means is that the body no longer naturally makes its own insulin. Your organ, called a pancreas, is the one whose job it is to make insulin. But if it no longer makes insulin, that's typically going to be type 1 diabetes with an autoimmune cause, i.e. the body's immune system has attacked the pancreas and the cells in the islets of Langerhans no longer make insulin. Okay? So you will need to inject insulin and take it as a prescription medication for the entire rest of that person's life. Okay. Now, in today's world, unfortunately, a lot of things have changed over the last several decades, such that we now have adults showing up with type 1 diabetes. So we can't, in all good, accuracy, call it juvenile onset because that's simply not true anymore. We have adults as old as their 40s or 50s showing up with type 1 diabetes.
Beverly,
Yeah.
my husband was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at the age of 44. So just what you're saying, he was diagnosed in his mid-40s.
Yep. Which I find shocking because, those of us who are, chronologically over the age of about 35, 40, who are medical and health professionals, when we went to medical school, we went to nursing school, whatever schools we went to, we learned that type 1 was absolutely something that happened to young children. That has shifted. So we now see type 1 showing up in full-on adults, midlife adults, right? Menopausal adults, andropausal adults. It's just shocking to me that that's the case. The other side of this, though, and now by far the much more common kind of diabetes is type 2 diabetes. And I'll talk about numbers and definitions in a moment. So seeing that massive rise and increase in type 2 diabetes and prediabetes is alarming because this is not sustainable for human health globally. It's an international phenomenon. Unfortunately, the U.S. is really in trouble. Other things to know are that issues with cognitive decline, Alzheimer's, and Alzheimer's is a subset of a broader category called dementia. That's often referred to as type 3 diabetes. So we've got all of these blood sugar issues that are absolutely at the forefront under the bigger umbrella of metabolic problems, metabolic health issues. The good news about type 2 and prediabetes, and certainly from what we're finding to some extent, type 3 diabetes, is that they can be improved and or possibly reversed. That's not the same thing as cure, but we're going to talk about that.
Okay, that's great because the word reverse, that's what I say about bone loss and osteoporosis.
Yeah.
And you did refer to metabolic. And so just to kind of clarify, because I want to make sure that everybody gets an understanding of this, it's your internal balance biochemically, what's happening. So we need to be internally balanced because when we're out of balance, when we're in a disease state, and that's when we get diagnosed with diseases like diabetes and osteoporosis.
That's a great way to look at it, right? Our health is dependent on balance. When we're out of balance, we're in a disease state. And the question is, can we do anything about it? Can we make it better for ourselves? Can we put it in the rearview mirror? Or are we doomed to just have it progress and, suffer as we go along? One of the things to me that's so important about bone health and osteoporosis, its precursor, osteopenia, is that when people become less and less able to move safely and to feel like they can be powerful and have agency in their physical bodies, they're more likely to become vulnerable to blood sugar issues because, to have the strength training, the bone health, the confidence and the independence to be out in the world and active, these things are all intertwined. That's part of why I'm excited for our conversation today. They go hand in hand.
Yeah, I love that because it's true. The DEXA scan puts the fear of goodness into people. I say it's like a death sentence because you get that diagnosis and you don't get retested typically for 2 years. And bam, here you are. So then you stop moving, then you contribute to more loss, whether it's in your bones, your muscles. So yeah, I'm so glad that you're bringing this up. And diabetes and blood sugar regulation, when I work with ladies, I see like more than one thing. It's not just that they have osteoporosis. They usually have thyroid issues, potentially diabetes or prediabetes. So yes, it's really important that we understand what this really is.
Yeah. It's interesting that when you think about healthcare and caring for health versus managing disease and disease management, the paradigms of different kinds of systems really come to the fore. So the fact that a DEXA scan is 2 years apart, and from what I can tell, people are not given consistently really great lifestyle-centric advice to help them restore and rebuild their bony system. The same as, in my opinion, they are not given that lifestyle advice and support for their blood sugar, for their blood pressure, fill in the blank. It's one of these things where, is there always really a pill for every ill? Or can we go to these root causes and empower people with real information based on what we think to be best practices today, so evidence-based, on how they can care for themselves and have a long, healthy, active future and not a long, sick, disease-ridden and miserable future, right? When we say longevity, for a lot of people, they're scared of it because as they get into their, let's say, 60s, 70s, and 80s, I can't tell you how many times this has happened. This is one of the most common comments I hear from my patients and clients. Dr. Yates, if I'd known I was going to live this long, I would have taken better care of myself. The good news is it's never too late. You can start today.
Yeah, it's so true. It's about your quality of life. It's
Yeah.
not like I don't care to live to 100. I have a lot of longevity genes. For me, my goal is not 100. My goal is whatever the number is to be the best quality possible.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
That's my goal. No drama, live long, live well. When I'm done, I'm done. Yeah.
There's one doctor, I read something, it was so interesting. She said, this is where our goal should be: happy, healthy, dead.
That's really clarifying, isn't it? It's like, are we on that path? And do we have the information we need? Do we have the people on our health team that can help us get there? Because sometimes I look at what goes on and what is the standard of care, and I'm like, this isn't even science-based. What is this based on? It doesn't make any sense.
Well, yeah, because standard of care in traditional medicine is really disease management. And Beverly, the work you do, the work I do, we actually see what happens. I mean, I've worked with thousands of women in yoga classes and I see the breakdown. And I experienced it in my own body when my hip joint collapsed when I was 50. So we're really trying to prevent future suffering. We're trying to raise awareness to preventative measures to improve your quality of life. And as you stated, it's a lifestyle. It's not a pill. It is a lifestyle. There's the way you think, the way you move, and what you eat play
Yeah.
a critical role in your health, whether it's blood sugar regulation, whether it's bone metabolism balance internally. So it's really important.
Those are critical, right? Now, when you talk about bone metabolism internally, that brings up the issue because some people's minds, they might not really understand where the overlap could be here between diabetes and osteoporosis or its earlier precursor, osteopenia. So, friends, let's think about it, right? There's all sorts of goodness in our blood. There's also waste products in our blood. This is a normal, natural daily exchange. We need that. The problem comes in where if you have blood sugar levels that are too high, it literally clogs things up. Your blood becomes stickier, there's more inflammation, all of which directly interferes with the nourishment of your bones. That bony matrix needs to be able to get its nutrients in and waste products out. And diabetes compromises that exchange. It's that basic.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. And that chronic inflammation is a major root cause of bone loss. And you mentioned earlier, instead of the traditional approach that we've been doing with where's the disease and here's the pill, and that, Beverly, is because it's controlled by big pharma, big food, and big insurance. So they have to have a pill to give you. But instead of looking at it from that approach, if you look at the root causes, which you mentioned earlier, then that becomes the why. traditional medicine looks at the what's happening. Here's the pill. Let's manage it. But if you do the root cause approach, like you were mentioning, you get to the why. Now you have the toolbox of items and lifestyle practices to actually stop it, slow it down, and reverse it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So people need to know what's in their toolbox, right?
Mhm.
So, when you look around, let's say the United States, and if you look internationally, you see the shocking rise in the last 2 to 3 decades of the onset, specifically of type 2 diabetes, prediabetes, type 3 diabetes, these blood sugar problems. Some of the things that we notice around the world that are really alarming is to just see how more common it is. And in fact, the same way type 1 used to be onset of children and insulin dependence because of the destruction of the pancreas, type 2 used to be much older, 60s, 70s, 80s. Now we see them crisscross in the wrong kind of way. We see kids as young as age 8, which should never happen, being diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. And we see people who are older in their 50s and 40s being diagnosed with type 1. So then you have to ask, okay, whoa, take a step back. What changed in the course of the last 2 to 3 or more decades? Well, our outer environment has changed. Our nutritional quality and nutrient density has gone down. People's level of stress, many people live in what I call cortisol nation, where they're constantly under some kind of stressor, real or perceived. There's a lot more that's going on that is hijacking blood sugar, and not all of it is really in people's control. One of the interesting things in terms of a myth to dispel is that type 2 diabetes means someone doesn't care for themselves and doesn't care about their health. A lot of people have the blame, shame, judgment attitudes towards people who have type 2 diabetes, and they love to stigmatize it. I'm not sure what that is about people's personalities that they feel the need to laugh at or make fun at other people. But here's a newsflash for you. There are plenty of people who have type 2 diabetes who are shocked to receive that diagnosis, who are eating what we would normally call healthy foods. They are exercising regularly and caring for themselves in the ways that they've been taught are healthy, but clearly are inadequate in their specific situation. For the vast majority of people today, it's a different conversation. It's more nuanced. It could be from the stress. Maybe they had a really rough time with their business and it's just collapsed. We have various catastrophes in terms of weather, wildfires, hurricanes, tsunamis, whatever it may be, things that are obviously not in people's hands that provide a severe amount of stress and displacement. There goes your blood sugar. What if they were divorced and they got a shock in their personal relationships? What if they were exposed to a virus that caused the onset of type 2 diabetes? All sorts of things that can happen. What if they live by, let's say, oil refineries or other things that we know that spew toxic material into the air and the water, and they've been exposed to that maybe in their childhood, young adult years? Traumas of various kinds. There's lots of ways to get to that diagnosis. So please avoid being judgmental and stigmatizing people. You haven't walked in their shoes. You don't know their story. And I'm talking also to clinicians who might be listening and watching, because I've noticed some of our colleagues will paint someone with a very broad brush and never give them the respect of at least listening and finding out what happened. Then we could talk about the crazy crap that's in the foods, so that if you ever eat anything that's processed, really any of it, if you look at the labels, all of that chemical soup that's on the labels of these products, much of it is meant to stimulate your appetite and leave you feeling unsatisfied, so you're never satiated. They love to mix up those foods via their perversion, I feel, of food scientists, so that you want to have more and more and more. And then you're like, whoa, I only meant to have 2 or 3 of these particular cookies or chips. And my God, I just plowed through the whole bag and I want another one. Why am I not full? And you're spinning out of control. I feel like it's not fair to poison people and then blame them for the problem. My 2 cents.
Yeah. And like Dr. Mark Hyman, he came and spoke at a summit that I was at, and he actually goes to DC to try to do some of this in the food industry. Because you're right, the scientists are in the labs actually trying to make something look, smell, feel, to create this desire. They are doing it from a chemical and they study this. So it is they're figuring out, like, how do we trigger, how do we stimulate that desire for more and more and more. It's really sad. I mean, it really is. I always wonder, who are these people that have these jobs? Who are the people in these companies that are making the cereals for kids with the fake colors that the rest of the world doesn't even allow in their food supply? That's what's interesting. And when you look at the world, especially in Europe, there are things they wouldn't even allow to come in their food supply
Right.
that we here in the US, It's there. And now we are realizing how toxic, how poisonous, how this is contributing to imbalance internally, to diseases like diabetes, like osteoporosis. It is, I always wonder, who are these people
Yeah.
that do this?
I
Or
hear
do they
you,
know?
Debbie.
Yeah.
Do they understand or do they even care about the impact that their work is leaving, what their legacy is of death and destruction and miserable lives? You got kids acting out in school, unprecedented kinds of problems. And, you look at the labels of some of these products, particularly like breakfast cereals, etc. It's a tragedy that doesn't have to happen. So we all have to be smarter consumers and influence as much as we can the people around us to make better choices where possible. And we also need to make sure, at least here in the US, that the foods that we're talking about that are the healthier options are affordable. In other countries, I can't help but notice this. Whenever I travel, healthy foods are not super expensive. They really aren't. And we've got this upside down right now in the US. It's really a shame.
It is. And you kind of mentioned that people think they're eating healthy. I would say the same thing for bone health. Women don't realize that sugar, gluten, and dairy are triggering inflammation. I'm imagining even in diabetes that might be the case. Can you
Yes.
give us a little what your suggestions or recommendations are for food, or even tell us what some of the foods are doing that are exacerbating the condition?
It's so great that you bring up the issues with sugar, gluten, and dairy. I've got a book coming out in January 2026 about diabetes and fix your blood sugar, right? And in fact, all of the recipes that I have in the book, we contain no dairy, no gluten, no sugar. And, it's just, you have to really think about food, right? Like 100 years ago, people had severe problems with water supply, right? We had diseases like polio, et cetera, that were rampant because of inadequate, healthy water that people could regularly exercise. GI problems, diarrhea. I mean, it was bad. Then we made improvements in our water. Things have gotten so much better. Now we're poisoning our food. It's like, if we could just stop all of that. So the things that are going to matter really in terms of food, let's start with that big category. When you look at nutrition, I have 4 food groups that I talk about, and that's one more than what the USDA likes to put forward, right? So we've got our proteins, and we can have plant-based source, meat, fowl, seafood options there. We certainly have our healthy fats. We have our carbohydrates. We split those in two. We have what I call the resistant starch, slow burning, healthful carbohydrates. And then we have the blood sugars roller coaster, not helpful carbohydrates like plain sugar and its friends. And then finally, the fourth category I've added, and some people might say I'm cheating, but I think it's a good way to think about it, which is fiber. Anytime you can add fiber to your diet, fiber, just like active working muscles for exercise, both of those, right? Fiber, active working muscles are blood sugar sponges. What do I mean by that? It helps you to get to and sustain a healthy blood sugar level. So if you can boost the fiber content of your foods at each meal, and yes, this includes breakfast. So I advocate, for instance, having leafy green vegetables as part of breakfast, lunch, and dinner as a simple way to cover the fiber base, even when you're traveling. You know, these days here in the US, you can get a little box of salad greens already pre-washed, anywhere $3 to $5. Even when you travel, I even see them in small corner stores, little family markets, bodegas, more access for more people wherever they may live and however they may live. So it's easy to get those vegetables in. And in doing that, you're absolutely laying the foundation for a healthy blood sugar level. You're making it easier for your gut microbiome to keep your blood sugar in a healthy place, to have your nutrients, I'd like to say, organized so that the good ones are promoted and you're making more of them. And this is going to nourish your bones. Your bony matrix is going to say, thank you. This is all good stuff.
Yeah, so my one of my main courses that I offer is Healthy Gut, Healthy Bones,
Hmm.
and one of my main lifestyle suggestions and recommendations is 30 grams per day of fiber. And
Okay.
so I love that you said it's a blood sugar sponge. It's also the brake, instead of the gas pedal, it's a brake. So it slows down what's happening in your gut. It feeds good beneficial gut microbes that maintain your mucosal barrier so you don't trigger inflammation in your gut, which is a root cause of so many diseases, including osteoporosis. And then when people are diabetic, when they're looking at their carbs and if they're counting carbohydrates, you actually typically subtract the fiber grams because that is kind of buffering off the speed at which the food gets converted to sugar in your blood.
Well said. That's absolutely right. It's such a friend. It's a way to get two for one. You're nourishing your gut. You're feeding those healthy microorganisms in your gut. You're also slowing the release of whatever blood sugar content in your meal might be there. You're also helping your cholesterol, for those of you concerned about cholesterol. It's really just a wondrous thing. You check a lot of boxes if you can get that kind of a habit going. And if you get disrupted, if you have to travel all of a sudden, you get a surprise, maybe you're traveling and something unexpected happens, get back on track as soon as you can because you can feel it in your own body. You know you're feeling better. Your bowel movements will be more regular, therefore the trash goes out, right? Like it's all good. Nutrients can come in, the trash goes out. We good. We love it. This is the way we want things to work.
Beverly, you know what I say? I say eat a dump truck because the fiber becomes the bulk or the dump truck that actually all the stuff that you don't need anymore in your colon goes onto, and that becomes your stool the next morning.
Yeah.
So I say eat a dump truck.
So long as we take action, I say, however this works for you, please do it. Because really, these are the key things to focus on and are available to everyone. You don't have to have special letters after your name or live in a certain zip code to benefit from this, right? This works for everybody.
Right. hmm Yeah. So diet is such a powerful tool.
Yeah.
What are some of the foods that shouldn't be eaten if you have diabetes?
That's a great question. So here's where I'm a fan of data and facts, right? In addition to being a naturopathic doctor, long-term experience, clinical, licensed, started a residency program, also an MIT engineer. One of the things I like a lot are continuous glucose monitors, CGMs, because you're getting 24/7 data from this biosensor, from this simple device you can put in on the back of your arm, follow whatever the directions are. These things are even now available over the counter, which is so amazing. Finally, thank you. So people don't have to have a prescription. And this way you can get that 24/7 data for about 2 weeks for most of these devices to see exactly how your body is responding to what you eat. The reason I say that is that I've seen people have unusual or unexpected bio-individual responses to foods where it might have been a healthy food, generically speaking. Maybe it's blueberries, maybe it's quinoa, maybe it's cauliflower. And for them, all of which those three, we would not expect a big blood sugar reaction. For some people, any one of those three might put them on the blood sugar roller coaster, and now they've got a problem, right? But it was otherwise healthy food. But their body did not have a healthy response to that food. Therefore, if you use a CGM, ideally for, say, a minimum of 2 weeks, better off if you can do it for 3 months out of the course of a year if you don't already have diabetes, just so you can see what is your blood sugar doing, especially when you're asleep. Here's the deal. When you're asleep, as soon as your head hits that pillow to when you awaken in the morning, your blood sugar should reset. Why? Because you're not eating, you're not drinking. It is a natural fasting window. There's no special magic here. That's how we're built. So when you wake up, your blood sugar should be at a healthy level. And if it isn't, you need to see what's happening right before you're going to bed and when you're asleep. Because if you're one of these people who has blood sugar spikes in the middle of the night, whether or not it's part of what's called the dawn phenomenon, you need to know about that. And so your day, in terms of your blood sugar response, will set up your night. What if you suddenly get tired and fatigued and you're like, gosh, when I eat certain things for lunch, an hour or two later, I'm a faceplant on my desk. I'm just falling asleep. You need to investigate and find out what's in that food. It may be one or two foods out of, say, three things you had at that meal or five that are hijacking your blood sugar. And they might be healthy things. On the other hand, they might be things that you have no business eating, right? But it's an individual response. You need to find out what works for you. So I can't really sit here with integrity and say one list is a one size fits all. This is healthy. But those four categories of food, that absolutely I can say.
Well, okay, and I'm going to say something, and then I know you do the lifestyle approach. This was a diet, but it kind of then goes into something else. We have cortisol's our main stress hormone, and
Mhm.
there's a balance that needs to be maintained. One of the labs I run looks at a 5-point CAR, cortisol awakening response, and we
Yep.
look at the pattern. I've read that they believe during sleep that our body processes maybe the day before, or I don't know the time frame, the cortisol output of the day. So then stress management, what you're subjecting yourself to, whether it's stress in food, right? So if you ate maybe a non-organic, especially some of the dirty dozen foods, then maybe you were exposed to toxins. That's a stressor inside your body that maybe it's dealing with. I know I run blood tests for food sensitivities, and I find almonds and blueberries in some people, but usually it's because there's leaky gut or unhealthy gut. And so there's just so many reasons. That's why probably we can't just say one food because it's not just food. Stress management plays such a role. And I don't know that people understand the link between what they're thinking, what they're exposing themselves to, what they are eating with their sensory organs, right? Their ears, their eyes, not just what you're eating with your mouth in terms of food, but what you're consuming affects your cortisol and your blood sugar. Can you speak to that?
That's a great point. Nourishment and consuming, these things are intertwined. It's one of the reasons why, if I'm working with a person who has diabetes and we detect that there's issues with their sleep or their stress levels or both, heaven forbid, I really, really work with them on identifying what can be causing these issues, right? So if their blood sugar is not responding to really basic support, and you say, okay, what else is going on? This might be a little more nuanced. So for some people, I basically put them on a media diet. I will say, you're not supposed to look at news, social media, your crazy friends posts, whatever, within 2 to 3 hours of bedtime. You just need to purge it. It shouldn't even be in your psyche. Don't take that into your sleep world. I really feel like we are spiritual beings having a physical moment and not the other way around. And if we honor that, if we say at the soul level that we are nourishing ourselves with things that are helpful and healthful, then let's be consistent about how we apply it. That being said, I'm not saying you should be like a turtle and never pay attention to anything in the world, because that's actually dangerous in a different way. But I do think it's important to be discerning about what's coming in. And if it's all, hate and murder and attack and like, really, like, do you really want that? So I agree with you about that thinking about nourishment more broadly, and look at our relationships, look at the things that we might watch on television or, listen to in terms of podcasts, any kinds of media consumption. And frankly, some of the people that are in our lives who just want to fill our heads full of just bizarre, strange things. We really have to be thoughtful about that, because I feel that there's a way in which that can really ruin health. And you're going to be the one who's left with a mess, you know?
Yeah, well, they say 80 to 90% of all illness is linked to stress. And so awareness, it's about awareness.
Hmm.
And so even what we're saying here, this when I studied to become a functional health coach in 2014, and I started to learn about this whole HPA axis,
Hmm.
how the thoughts or what we see with the sensory organs stimulate the brain. And if fear or scarcity is triggered, the signal goes to your adrenal glands to output cortisol, which means now you're not making steroid sex hormones, which we need for bone health and other aspects. So your cortisol increases. When cortisol increases, one of the main things is to increase blood sugar.
Yep,
That's one of its main
that's
functions.
absolutely right.
And then if you have elevated chronic blood sugar, you're now going to have your pancreas pumping out insulin. And when there's elevated insulin for too long, you now have the immune system responding. So you're in this imbalanced place. And what I want to ask you, Beverly, about the diabetic part of this. So, because I didn't understand insulin resistance. Is insulin resistance because your body is pumping out and it's not listening, and maybe your body doesn't get as good at recognizing the insulin's there to let the blood sugar go into the cells? Is that what the process is?
It's basically that the levels of insulin, the average level, is starting to rise. And after a while, that signal, if you want to think of insulin as a signal, as it goes up and up and up, the cells have more and more of a difficult time hearing the signal. They become resistant. So on the cell wall, insulin sits there, and it should, if it's functioning well, grab up your blood sugar, your glucose, and bring it inside the cell and make it available for energy, right? This process could get corrupted, though, if there's just too much insulin all the time. And think about it. If you have people in your life or a workplace situation or other things where, somebody is constantly yelling, they're on 10 all the time. Yeah, 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 all the time, right? You start to not hear them. You tune them out. Well, this is what's going on with insulin. So if we look at a lab test number, like say a fasting insulin, that can be very helpful just to get an idea of where you are on that spectrum. What we want is insulin sensitivity such that the cells become very efficient via the insulin that sits on the cell wall is a receptor of taking up glucose, of taking up blood sugar and bringing it inside the cell to make it available for energy. Sometimes we will store some of that excess energy, that excess glucose, blood sugar, other parts of the body, typically in body fat and storage. However, I will say this, with cortisol as a stress hormone, it has a very crucial, essential role in our lives. Cortisol can keep us safe. In a moment of crisis, of actual real danger, we can become superheroes. This is when you hear about the 95-pound woman who lifted the car off a loved one, right? How did she do that? She did that because there was a threat. And she was able to respond in that moment. Could she do it every day easily? No. But in that moment, she was a superhero, right? A superwoman. Okay. Also, think about it though, with cortisol in that moment where she's lifting this car, or something equally amazing, she's moving her body, she's using her active working muscles. So, strength training is a great way to start to restore insulin sensitivity and to help bust through insulin resistance. That's why I say active working muscles are a blood sugar sponge. When your muscles are active, you become more insulin sensitive, and the extra blood that goes to the muscles now is taking the glucose, the blood sugar, out of your bloodstream. So if you're exercising and your CGM is showing you that there's more blood sugar, it makes sense because your body has mobilized your glucose to feed your muscles. Within an hour or so, half hour, if you're more trained, it'll come down. You're fine. Don't freak out about that. That is a normal physiologic response. We want that.
Okay, that's great because also we need the bigger and stronger your lean skeletal muscle is, the better it is for bone health.
Absolutely.
So,
Those two are intertwined. They
yeah.
are important. And I really wish, honestly, we could get this info to girls and boys in middle school and high school as they're going through puberty and beyond so that they understand part of caring for themselves for a lifetime should be strength training. They preserve their balance. They reduce the risks of falls. We all know that when people, or I don't know if we all know, but many of us are more aware these days that as we get older, if we don't produce and protect our musculature, we become far more vulnerable to falls. We lose our balance. Our sense of proprioception really gets corrupted. And as a result, we become at risk for the kinds of falls that we hear that happen to people who are older, and they often don't live long or live well after that happens. It's so unnecessary. We can avoid this, but we need to know how to care for ourselves.
Yeah, bone loss begins in our 30s, and
Yeah,
so we have up until that point to create the most bone density or, if we think of our bones like a bank, we have the most deposits to save for the future.
I love
So,
that
yeah,
analogy. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, it's that's what we need to raise awareness to. I'm moving into the perimenopause crowd to really raise awareness in the 40-year-olds, the
yeah,
30-year-olds,
yeah,
what's happening because you can maintain what you have easier
yeah,
than trying to rebuild. But yeah,
yeah,
you're right with the young kids also.
yeah.
It's a really good, a place to be sharing this information.
Absolutely. I feel like I got away with something really good. I just didn't know any better at the time. Um, my parents divorced when I was about a year old. And I was able to, as an adult, as a full grown woman, reclaim a relationship with my biological father, which was great. And in that process, getting to know his side of the family, I discovered he was one of 13 siblings, of whom all of them had some kind of diabetes. Debbie, whose family has 100% prevalence of anything? It's crazy, right? So that really got my attention. And at that time, I was very much in that transition from electrical engineering in Silicon Valley to becoming a licensed doctor of naturopathic medicine, right? So now my ears perk up. I'm going, wait, genetics. And so then, about a decade later, we get these tests for genomics and all. Long story short is I've watched diabetes move like a wrecking ball through my biological father's side of my family. I realized what a gift I gave myself by accident by being an athlete from childhood on. I played sports from grade school, middle school, high school, college, right? Division 3, because MIT is, I think, Division 1 only for probably rowing. Definitely not a hugely athletic school. But I stayed with that all the way to the finding out I was pregnant with our first child. So I was probably 38 when I stopped with actively with the pounding, with basketball, with boogie boarding, with rock climbing, with volleyball, with soccer, with softball, like all the sports, right? I'm a Title IX baby. I love all that stuff. But being an athlete, I think, made the difference. So I'd already built, just like you're saying, my muscle bank account and my bone bank account. And now, if I get a DEXA scan, any of the bone measures, I have fabulous numbers. But I'm grateful. I realized what role good fortune, luck played in that. So for those of you who don't have that athletic history, please listen to what Debbie and others of her guests are saying. You can do it. You can make it better. You can reverse your situation, but you got to stay focused. If you get knocked off track, get back up on that horse, get back on track as soon as you can. Please don't give up because the person who's going to gain the most as well as lose the most is you.
Yeah, I used to have this saying when I would teach yoga, I would say, Rome wasn't built in a day, yet it was built. So every day, the brick that gets put, and for me, Beverly, my body broke at age 50. I had a collapsed hip joint when I was 50 years old. And for 17 months, I lived like that before I had my total hip replacement at 51. And I went back to beginner body. I used to have a super strong body. I used to go to really strong yoga classes, but I had to go back to beginner. And I got my strength back, and it was really slow. Like, I would stand in the kitchen and just lift my leg off the floor like an inch.
I hear
I
you, Debbie. It's
Yeah,
humbling, isn't it?
yeah, it's humbling, and I'm so grateful for that experience because I love to get new people in my yoga classes or in my programs that I teach. Because we know what's possible,
Right.
and it
Right.
is an everyday, and so you develop that confidence slowly, and it's really important. Okay, Beverly, so let's kinda give some, like, view of what we spoke about today for somebody
Okay.
listening to this. You did speak about constant glucose monitors, and I see that that is your free giveaway that'll be below in the show notes. And so that's a great thing. I think I'm gonna try that. Even though I'm scared of needles, I feel like I wanna know,
It's one.
about
It's
that.
real small. It comes out quick. You put it on the back of your arm, follow the directions. And so it might pinch a little bit. Then again, it might not hurt at all. I will give you one tip. If you put it on, be aware if you're a side sleeper. You want to put it on the back of your arm, but in a position where you're not going to roll over on it when you're asleep if you're a side sleeper. Otherwise, have at it. I think it's
Okay,
great.
so not outside here on the arm then,
Yeah, you
okay.
might need to place it a little bit more inner or a little bit more outer. So, like, lie down if you're a side sleeper and see how you normally would roll because CGMs don't like it when you roll right over them. That's my one tip for you side sleepers.
Okay, and then where does the data go? Do you get the data or is it
Yeah.
actually going to a place?
It's going straight to your smartphone. So you can download an app to your smartphone, usually for whatever CGM it is. And if you wanted to look at more detail, like to be able to snap a picture of your food and be able to log like your exercise, your meals, things like that, apps like from the company that I work with, Theia, that can help as well so that you know what you're doing. And it will give you and or your doctor, or if you're working with any other health professional, really great picture of your overall lifestyle. So more than just blood sugar as numbers, the thing I like about, apps like Theia is that you can now see what's going on. Like, oh, maybe I thought this particular breakfast was good for me. Like a lot of people are told to eat oatmeal for breakfast. But now you're looking at that going, that's not so good. Or maybe it's fine and you should continue to have it, right? It just takes the mystery out of this. Similarly, you can see the effects for exercise, for your sleep, and you can also correlate your moods because it's all in one place. It's easier to manage that way. People get such amazing insights. And then from there, they can sustain their health because now the mystery has been taken out of it.
Yeah, I'm gonna actually consider using this in the work that I do
Okay.
because, yeah, then you could actually see it's very custom, so you actually can see what happens when you do add more fiber into your diet? What
Right.
happens when you do learn meditation, breath work, present moment awareness for stress management? What happens when you do a practice for your hips or your spine or something
Yeah.
for 2 weeks? What do you see changing there?
Yep.
Really, because this is one of the most tightly regulated, most important internal body systems is blood sugar regulation.
It is amazing how powerful it is. And if we can just harness that, and here's the good news, we don't need to be perfect. It's about progress, not perfection. I'm going to say that one more time. It's about progress, not perfection. So if you can get the two or three things of the five elements of the Yates protocol working for your blood sugar, it's going to work for your bony health too. So nutrition, meal timing, stress, sleep, and then our partnered friends, exercise and strength training. In this case, with an emphasis on strength training.
Okay, great. Yeah, and strength training definitely for bone health. You need those big, strong muscles for balance, fall prevention, flexibility, all of that. Okay, so you just told us about your 5 steps, right? Or
Mhm.
your 5 pillars. What
Yeah.
did you call them? Your 5
Yes.
steps. 5 steps, and those are all big, lifestyle areas to focus on, which is
Yep.
really important. Constant glucose monitor, because then you can customize and individualize
Yep.
your blood sugar management to you
Hmm.
to see where do you need to work in those 5 areas. You told us about how we have to think differently of diabetes.
Yep.
It's true. We used to think that people who got diabetes were heavy people that overate, right? We used to think that. There's so many tiny, thin people with diabetes, so it's really not what we thought it was.
Thank you for bringing that up. In the US, it tends to be that about 60% of the people who have the diagnosis of type 2 diabetes are overweight or obese. 40% are not. Internationally, the majority of people who have type 2 diabetes are lean. They are not overweight. Isn't it interesting? Again, they don't allow the crap in the food we allow here. I do think that's part of the puzzle.
Yeah, I think that's part of it, and then I travel a lot. Typically, they have less stress.
Huh?
I find that, and I mean, maybe I can't generalize like that, but yeah, typically, that's a part of it as well.
There's less isolation. I feel like people are more likely to have friends or family and be in community and not so alone. I think in the US, we really have got to work on how we are treating each other and ourselves. We have some room for improvement here, and I'm hopeful that with more awareness and with all the wonderful work that you do, Debbie, and others like us, that we'll be able to reach a critical mass of people, and make this better. Because we humans, we are social creatures. Even if we're introverts like I am, we still need each other. There's no point in trying to think that our life is better off all by ourselves. We're simply not built for that. We're social creatures.
Yeah. I see diabetes and what we were just speaking about, the diagnosis and people being shocked. It's the same thing that happens with osteoporosis.
Yeah,
If I
they
speak
are
to some
shocked.
really newly diagnosed woman, she can't believe, "I exercise well, I eat well, I do this." It's like, "Well,
Mhm.
wait, but how is your stress levels?" Or, "Are you
Yeah.
sleeping well?" Or, "What are you eating?"
Yeah. I had a friend who was diagnosed lean, petite woman, very physically active. Her entire exercise was swimming. So it wasn't weight bearing, right? She ate great. Her stress levels periodically were just through the roof. And so I wasn't surprised at the diagnosis, but she was. So it was a
Yeah.
learning moment.
Yeah, you need to, like, hit the floor, but I will say with swimming, there is some resistance. You're gonna lengthen your muscles, you're gonna increase flexibility, joint range of motion, which is great for pain reduction, for mobility, to be able to be better aligned, to create better forces when you do focus on bone strengthening and muscle strengthening. So it has its benefit, but yeah, mixing it up is, I
Yep.
think, really an important thing as well.
Mixing it up
Um
is critical.
yeah. And one thing I don't know if the listeners are aware of this, but the studies show that women with a diagnosis of diabetes are more prone to osteopenia and
Yes,
osteoporosis.
they are.
So there is a link there. So this
That's what,
matters, which is why I wanted to have you on here.
yeah, thank you so much for this invitation. I've loved our conversation. I think the issues with that microvasculature, the small blood vessels, what is nourishing the bony matrix is where the compromise with diabetes comes in, because that extra thick blood sugar, if you will, kind of gummed up and inflamed that comes from diabetes is what makes women, men too, but perhaps it shows a little more readily in women because we tend to be smaller in terms of our skeleton. So it may show up sooner with a compromise that winds up in osteopenia and osteoporosis because they start out with diabetes, or the other way around, either way.
Yeah, they go hand in hand. And so it
Hmm.
becomes another area to focus.
Yep.
Beverly, is there anything you'd like to say before we end our discussion?
Yeah, one thing. So, friends, as you're listening to all this wonderful advice that Debbie has in her other podcast, I really encourage you to commit to one thing that you're going to improve. It could be your nutrition. Maybe you're eating foods that don't agree with you or you're not sure. Maybe you have food sensitivities, food reactions, and you just want to, have your own decoder ring, so to speak, your CGM, right? To help you figure out what the heck's going on. Please do it. Think about your meal timing. One of the biggest problems I've seen with many people who have type 2 diabetes is that they're often the rock in their family, their community, their workplace. They're the go-to person. And so sometimes their own self-care is not what it needs to be. And they skip lunch. So if you're a person who eats 3 meals a day, please make sure you have a plan for lunch. If you're eating 2 meals a day, whatever you're doing, and have a healthy plan that really loves and nourishes you, make sure that you are paying attention to your stress levels and doing what you can to get stress under control so it's not ruining your health. Because this is one way in which it shows up. There are many ways stress can ruin our health. Please make sure you're paying attention to your sleep, get great sleep as much as you can because it's a lovely opportunity to reset. And it's a beautiful way for your entire body to heal overnight. And you have another opportunity every day, or I should say every night, to make that better. And then, of course, exercise with an emphasis on strength training so you can be your healthiest you.
Perfect. Thanks. Yeah, that's great. That's great information.
All
And
right, super.
yeah, thank you. So, Beverly, it was been lovely to have you here. And I look forward to hearing from ladies about how great this discussion was because they always tell me, oh, I love this talk and I love that talk. So, thank you so much for joining and sharing your wisdom with us.
You're very welcome, Debbie. Thank you so much for the work that you do in the world, and I wish you continued success reaching out and helping people because this really makes a difference for us, particularly as we age. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for joining me on Stronger Bones Lifestyle. Are you ready to take charge of your future? For show notes, resources, and information on my programs, please visit DebbieRobinson.com. If today's episode empowered you, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who needs it. Together, we're building stronger bones and stronger lives. Take care, and I'll see you in the next episode.